Did you know that many illnesses don't start in the body, but in the mind? Constant thoughts, worries that don't stop, and emotions stored up for years don't just disappear. The body hears it all, absorbs it, and over time it manifests. What you think about every day, what you silently fear, what you avoid feeling so you don't seem weak, all leave a mark, sometimes invisible at first, but it is very real. It isn't always about a physical cause, because sometimes what hurts on the inside begins to express itself on the outside in the form of insomnia, unexplained aches, exhaustion with no apparent reason, or a pressure in the chest that just won't go away. We live in a society that applauds productivity but rarely teaches us to pause. It demands results, yet ignores emotional well-being. And so, mental fatigue, self-criticism, fear, guilt, and resentment accumulate until the body can't take it anymore. Stress is always a cry for help. Sometimes it's a whisper that makes its way into the skin, the digestion, the back, and the thoughts, and when it isn't heard, it turns into illness. Today is the time to look within, to ask ourselves what thoughts we are feeding, what emotions we are silencing, and how all of that is affecting our health in ways we might not even be aware of. Because the mind doesn't just influence, it also creates, and understanding that can change everything. Louise Hay dedicated her life to showing a truth that was ignored for years, that the body listens to everything the mind thinks and everything the heart keeps silent. She taught that behind many physical ailments are thoughts full of fear, unexpressed emotions, and harsh words that one repeats to oneself without realizing it. She wasn't just talking about symptoms, she was talking about internal causes, about how sustained mental stress can weaken the immune system, alter digestion, tense muscles, affect sleep, and slowly extinguish our vital energy. And it isn't just about stress from having too many tasks, it's about silent stress, the kind that comes from thoughts like, I'm not enough, I have to be perfect, I can't fail, I have to endure it. This type of stress settles in invisibly and is often normalized. But sooner or later, the body starts to speak through anxiety, constant fatigue, aches and illnesses that seem to have no explanation. That's why today I want to invite you to look inward, to honestly recognize how you are talking to yourself, what you are carrying, and what needs to be released so that your body can heal too. Because everything that is stored weighs you down, and everything that is repressed transforms. But it is also true that everything that is understood is liberated, and everything that is transformed with love can heal. One of the most silent and dangerous forms of stress comes from constant self-demand. This internal need to always perform, to show that you can handle everything and to deliver even when the body can't anymore, is a pervasive issue. Living with the idea of I have to be more, I have to do better, I can't fail creates a permanent state of tension. It's a pressure that often doesn't come from the outside but from a demanding internal dialogue that never stops. The body isn't given permission to rest, nor is the mind. Even if everything seems fine on the surface, an alert state is activated inside that becomes chronic. And when this demand is sustained day after day, the nervous system gets exhausted and the immune system begins to weaken. Defenses go down, sleep becomes more superficial, and rest is no longer restorative. Frequent colds, pains with no clear medical cause, and persistent fatigue that doesn't improve even with hours of sleep appear. And in many cases, all of this isn't even associated with stress because it has already become part of the daily landscape. But the body knows. It registers the emotional burden that comes with living under pressure, and when it feels there is never a pause, when it isn't allowed to stop, it begins to express that overload through physical symptoms. Healing begins when we stop demanding so much of ourselves and start talking to ourselves with more compassion. It's about understanding that we don't have to earn rest, that we don't need to prove our worth through constant effort, that we are already enough even when we pause. A powerful phrase to start changing this dynamic is, "I am enough just as I am. I allow myself to rest without guilt." Repeating this, even if it doesn't feel true at first, is a way to soften the internal voice that pressures relentlessly, because that voice doesn't silence itself. It's re-educated with patience and love. Learning to identify when the body is asking for a pause and not ignoring it is also an act of deep self-care. Sometimes it's not about doing less, but about changing the way we talk to ourselves while we do it. Creating moments of silence, even if they are brief, helps to regulate the nervous system. Taking a deep breath, dropping your shoulders, closing your eyes for a few minutes, all of this sends a message to the body. We are no longer at war, and little by little, when you start respecting your own rhythm, the body responds. The mind calms down, the immune system strengthens, and rest stops feeling like a waste of time and becomes what it truly is, a sacred necessity. The fear of the future is one of the most common forms of silent suffering. It isn't visible from the outside, but it consumes from within. It is that constant sensation of anticipating the worst, of imagining scenarios that haven't even happened yet, but already make the body tremble as if they were real. Anxiety is born from there, not from the present, but from everything the mind projects as a possible threat. And although those thoughts often don't materialize, the body experiences them as if they were happening right now. Breathing becomes shallow, the chest tightens, and a pressure appears that prevents you from breathing freely. It becomes difficult to sleep. Rest no longer comes easily because the mind won't stop, won't let go, and won't trust. This repeated, sustained, and unquestioned fear blocks the natural flow of vital energy, the energy needed to create, to move with enthusiasm, and to live with lightness. It's as if a part of you is always holding back, waiting for something bad, and that waiting wears everything down. The body begins to manifest it with very clear symptoms. Difficulty breathing deeply, insomnia, a suffocating sensation with no apparent medical cause, constant tension in the chest or neck, and mental exhaustion upon waking. And the most painful thing is that it often isn't recognized as fear. It's experienced as a permanent restlessness, as an unexplained discomfort, as a kind of knot that won't loosen. But behind all of this there is almost always the same root, the fear of what might happen, the lack of confidence that you can handle what's to come, and the disconnection from the present moment. Healing the fear of the future isn't about having all the answers or controlling every detail. It's about starting to trust, about opening up an internal space where the mind doesn't have to anticipate everything to feel secure. An affirmation that can begin to soften that anxiety is, "I trust in life. Everything happens for my good." It might sound distant, even naive at first, but repeating it is a way to invite the body to let its guard down, to remind it that not everything that comes will be a threat, that there can also be good things along the way, even if they can't be seen today. Asking yourself in the midst of that restlessness, is this I'm thinking about really happening, or am I just imagining it, can help you return to the present. Because many times the danger isn't in what is happening, but in what you believe is going to happen. Observing how you breathe can also be a guide. Are you breathing calmly, or are you holding your breath without realizing it? Taking a few seconds to inhale deeply and exhale slowly can completely change your internal rhythm. It doesn't solve everything, but it calms the body, and that's already a beginning and something very powerful. Ask yourself, what would happen if, for today, you were to let go of the need to control the future? What if you gave yourself permission to trust, even for just a few minutes? How much energy could you release? How much space would open up in your mind, your chest, your life? You don't need to have certainties to be at peace. You just need to stop feeding so much fear. because sometimes the greatest relief comes not from knowing what's to come, but from allowing yourself to be here now, without fighting against everything that isn't yet. One of the deepest forms of stress comes from the way we talk to ourselves when we are in difficult moments. It is not just a demanding voice, it is a voice that sometimes becomes cruel, especially when we need support the most. When the body gets sick, we often don't respond with kindness. Reproach appears. You're like this again. You can't still be this weak. This is happening because you didn't do things right. When anxiety arrives, the internal dialogue doesn't console. On the contrary, it attacks. You're losing control. You're no good for this. You'll never be completely well. These types of thoughts aren't just fleeting phrases. They are wounds that reopen again and again inside the mind until the body begins to manifest them, because there is no possible rest when the mind is a hostile place. And it is there that many psychosomatic illnesses find their root, not only in fear or worry, but in the absence of self-care, in that habit of demanding even in pain, of speaking ill of oneself, even in fatigue, of blaming oneself, even when what is needed is comfort. Have you ever felt guilty for feeling bad? Have you demanded yourself to be well, just so you don't inconvenience others? Have you silenced your discomfort so you don't seem weak? Every time you ignore yourself, demand from yourself, or punish yourself from within, the body feels it. Because the body not only reacts to the external world, it also reacts to the emotional climate we create with our thoughts. And if that climate is full of harshness, the body reflects it, sometimes on the skin, sometimes in the stomach, sometimes in pains that can't be explained, but are felt every day. Healing the relationship with oneself begins by changing the tone of that internal voice, the one that for years has demanded more even in the midst of pain, that has ignored fatigue and has turned discomfort into a silent guilt. An affirmation that helps to restore that inner bond is, I accept and approve of myself exactly as I am. Repeating this is not a simple mental act. It is a way of teaching the body that it no longer has to live under threat, that it can relax, that it can heal in a more loving environment. Sometimes the most powerful things are the most subtle. Speaking to yourself with respect, letting go of the pressure to do everything perfectly, and giving yourself permission to feel as you feel without adding more weight. The body doesn't need demands, it needs understanding. And when that understanding becomes a habit, something begins to change. The nervous system calms down, the mind finds silence, and the body slowly stops defending itself. Resentment is a heavy emotion. It doesn't scream like anger or cry like sadness, but it stays inside, stagnant like something that couldn't get out. Storing up anger, pain, or disappointment without expressing them in a healthy way doesn't eliminate them, it just hides them, and the body takes charge of carrying them. Over time, that emotional burden begins to poison from within. It is a discomfort that doesn't dissipate, an internal tension that finds no outlet. And although everything may seem fine on the outside, inside something is burning, something is pressuring, something is squeezing. The body, unable to release that contained emotion, begins to manifest it in the form of symptoms. The digestive system is one of the first to respond: stomach pains, acidity, ulcers, inflammation. The liver is also affected, as it is one of the organs that most reflects repressed anger. You might experience a sensation of heaviness, exhaustion, and nausea with no clear cause. And often these discomforts repeat without finding a medical explanation, because the root isn't in what you eat or drink, but in what hasn't been said, what hasn't been released, and what is still burning in silence. Stored resentment acts like a slow poison. It doesn't just damage the relationship with others, it also deteriorates the relationship with oneself, because every time you hold on to what hurts, a little more of your vitality, joy, and inner clarity is extinguished. Releasing resentment doesn't mean justifying what happened or erasing the pain. It means stopping carrying something that still hurts, even though it is over. It is letting go out of self-love, not out of obligation. A powerful affirmation to begin this process is, I release the past with love. I choose to forgive, to be at peace. This phrase isn't directed at the person who hurt you. It's directed at your own body, at the mind that has held on to that memory, at the heart that deserves to rest. The act of forgiving, when it comes from within, brings physical relief. The stomach relaxes. The tension in the chest loosens. The liver stops holding emotions that don't belong to it. And most importantly, vital energy that was previously trapped in resentment is recovered. Sometimes it's enough to write what wasn't said, to give a voice to the anger in a safe space, to acknowledge the damage without softening it, but also without continuing to relive it, because the past has already happened. What continues to hurt is what is still being held on to, and when you choose to let go, you make way for something much more valuable than reason or pride: inner peace. Denying what you feel doesn't make it disappear, it just pushes it inward, where the body stores it without knowing for how long. Repressing emotions like sadness, anger, or fear is a way of disconnecting from yourself. It's like closing the door from the inside and pretending that everything is still the same, even though it's not. When emotions are repressed, the body becomes tense. Energy no longer flows. There is no space to feel with clarity or to rest deeply. The digestive system, sensitive to emotional states, is usually one of the first to reflect it. Bloating, heaviness, irregular bowel movements, and chronic discomfort with no apparent cause. The colon in particular responds to unexpressed fear, to anxiety that isn't recognized, and to anguish that isn't allowed to come out. And it is no coincidence that many people with emotional rigidity also live with bodily rigidity: tense shoulders, a stiff neck, a clenched jaw. The body becomes a shell. Denying what you feel is a learned strategy, perhaps because at some point you believed that showing emotions was a sign of weakness, or because expressing pain wasn't safe. But every emotion that isn't allowed to be felt becomes trapped, and what isn't released is somatized. Over time, these blockages not only affect the body, but also extinguish the connection with intuition, with creativity, and with the desire to live with presence, because feeling is also a form of existence. Healing is not just understanding what is happening, it is also allowing yourself to feel what you carry inside. Giving space to emotions is not surrendering to chaos. It is opening a door to liberation, because what isn't felt stagnates, and what stagnates ends up hurting. A key affirmation to reconnect with that forgotten part is, I allow myself to feel. My emotions also need space. That phrase doesn't seek to intensify the pain, but to soften the repression. When you stop fighting against what you feel, something in the body begins to relax. The stomach decompresses, the chest regains lightness, and energy circulates again. What emotion have you been holding in for a long time? What part of you needs to be recognized without judgment or hurry? Creating a space of intimacy, even if it's brief, to name what you're feeling can be profoundly healing. You don't need to explain it or fully understand it. It's enough to recognize it. Sometimes writing without a filter, crying without guilt, or talking softly to yourself is enough for the body to stop carrying so much alone. What if you stopped demanding yourself to be well all the time? What if feeling were a way to liberate yourself and not to lose control? There are times when emotion needs to be expressed, not to stay but to leave. And when it's allowed to do so, the body is grateful, because everything that finds its outlet stops hurting. Stress doesn't always arrive like a storm. Sometimes it is a slow, almost invisible accumulation. It builds up day after day with every task you can't let go of. with every "I have to" that takes precedence over your own well-being, and with every moment you choose to support others and not yourself. It's about never stopping, living for what others need, and giving without measure, without pause, without asking how you are on the inside, until the body can't take it anymore, and says so without asking permission through exhaustion, deep sadness, or collapse. This state has a name: burnout. It is a type of emotional, mental, and physical exhaustion caused by prolonged and poorly managed stress. It isn't simply being tired, it's feeling like there's no energy left for anything, that any minimal task becomes unmanageable, that the mind is saturated and the body doesn't respond. Burnout doesn't appear overnight. It forms little by little when you don't get enough sleep, when you ignore the body's signals, and when self-demand becomes the automatic mode, and sometimes it's disguised as responsibility, as commitment, as this is how it should be, until the collapse comes. It is common for this type of exhaustion to be accompanied by symptoms like mental confusion, apathy, irritability, insomnia, persistent physical pains, difficulty concentrating, and a sense of emptiness that nothing can fill. And even if you continue to meet all your external obligations, inside there are no longer any forces, because you can't live by putting out fires all the time without eventually burning out. Healing from deep exhaustion doesn't begin by doing more, but by doing less. It's not about abandoning everything, but about recovering your own space, about understanding that being available for others shouldn't mean being absent for yourself. An affirmation that can begin to change this dynamic is, "I also deserve care, rest, and love." Repeating it is a way to give value back to your energy, your time, and your well-being. It isn't selfishness, it's balance. It's recognizing that nobody can hold everything together forever, and that it's not necessary to demonstrate strength at the cost of your health. Sometimes the most urgent thing isn't to solve, to perform, or to respond. It's to stop and listen to what the body is asking for. What part of you is tired of being in the background? Where have you been giving more than you have? Taking care of yourself can be as simple as saying "not today," as turning off your phone, as going for a walk with no specific destination. It can also be talking to someone you trust and finally naming what weighs on you, or simply allowing yourself a day without demands. Because when you start treating yourself with the same care you offer to others, energy returns, the body is relieved, and life becomes more livable from within. There is a type of illness that doesn't show up in clinical analyses, but is felt with great force. It doesn't manifest with fever or inflammation, but with emptiness, with a sense of disconnection that starts inside and extends to everything else. It happens when you live constantly for others, doing what's expected, pretending to be well, saying yes when inside there's a muffled no. This disconnection with oneself is subtle but profound, and when it becomes chronic, it begins to hurt from the soul. Emotional needs don't disappear just because you ignore them. They accumulate, and that accumulation of silences, of unheard desires, of untaken pauses, eventually takes its toll, first in the form of dissatisfaction, then as a nameless sadness, and later as a spiritual illness. You begin to feel that nothing completely fills you, that everything tires you quickly, that life loses its color. The body responds with signals, pains with no medical cause, persistent exhaustion, and a feeling of being present but not truly inhabiting yourself. Disconnection from oneself also dulls intuition. The inner voice becomes distant, difficult to recognize, and when you don't listen, you also become disoriented. You lose your way, your purpose, and the deep meaning of why you do what you do. It's not uncommon for those who live like this to describe a knot in their throat, a pressure in their chest, or an inexplicable fatigue, because it's not just physical tiredness, it's an exhaustion of the soul, an urgent need to return home to oneself. Healing this disconnection doesn't require big external changes. It requires returning, stopping long enough to recognize yourself again, and listening to what has been waiting in silence, your own inner voice. An affirmation that opens up this return is, I return to myself. I listen to my body, my soul, and my heart. Returning to yourself isn't always comfortable, but it is profoundly necessary. It is remembering what you truly like, what you need, and what you are postponing to please others. It's asking yourself without rush, what am I ignoring about myself? What part of my life has been left without a soul? Sometimes it's enough to reconnect with the essentials, walking without distractions, writing what the heart can no longer hold in silence, or simply sitting in stillness and observing what you are feeling without judging it can also help. It also helps to surround yourself with what reminds you who you are: an inspiring book, an authentic conversation, contact with nature, art, or music, everything that doesn't demand anything but returns you to yourself. Because when you return to yourself, the body feels it. It is relieved, the mind becomes ordered, the soul breathes, and that emptiness that seemed impossible to fill begins to dissolve. Not because something comes from the outside, but because you decided to return. Louise Hay dedicated her life to reminding us of a truth that many forget: the mind and body are not separate. What you think, what you feel, and what you keep silent all leave a mark. And stress is not just a reaction to the environment. It is also the result of repeated thoughts, of repressed emotions, and of an internal voice that often doesn't know how to take care of us. According to Louise, every physical symptom is a message. The body speaks when the mind is overloaded, when there is guilt, when there is fear, and when there is self-demand. The body registers it and expresses it in the form of tension, illness, and imbalance. Accumulated stress, the kind that comes from I have to, I can't fail, and I have to be okay for everyone, is one of the main culprits of physical and emotional discomfort in our lives. And her approach wasn't just to observe the symptom, but to ask, what am I thinking that is making me sick? What am I feeling that I don't allow myself to express? Louise wasn't talking about denying pain, but about transforming it from within, about making peace with oneself, about learning to speak to oneself with love, about looking at the body as an ally, not as an enemy. Because when you start to heal the thought, the body responds. When the mind calms down, the soul rests. And when you choose to live from love and not from fear, health stops being a struggle and becomes a reflection of inner balance. Your mind can be a safe place, not a battlefield, and your body can stop carrying what doesn't belong to it. It's not about controlling every thought, but about cultivating a more loving gaze towards yourself, towards your story, towards who you are today. Every time you choose a kinder thought, every time you stop to breathe before demanding from yourself, every time you recognize an emotion without judging it, you are healing. You are liberating the body from an invisible burden. You are returning to yourself. You don't need to do everything perfectly. You just need to start listening to your body, observing your mind, and choosing anew. And little by little, what was once tension becomes relief. What was struggle becomes acceptance. And what was pain becomes transformation. Because as Louise said, if we are willing to do the mental work, almost anything can be healed. And that work doesn't start outside. It starts with you, here now, at this precise moment when you choose to think differently. How are you doing after listening to this? How do you feel now knowing that the body is not against you, but trying to talk to you? Do you think this video can help you feel lighter, more at peace, and more connected with yourselves? I would love for you to write in the comments how you feel and how you are going to start seeing life from now on. This channel is a space where there is no judgment. Many of us are on this path of searching, healing, and growth, and here we form a strong community where no one is alone. Thank you for being here, for listening with your heart, for choosing to look inward. If this content has been useful to you, I invite you to give it a like, subscribe, and share it with someone you think it could help. Remember this phrase from Louise: the power is always in the present moment, and in this moment you can choose yourself again. I send you a big hug and thank you so much for being part of this space.